Thank you very much. Thank you for all employees of ACMS, and thank you for inviting me for this lecture. So today I want to share with you a very interesting story that I have just run into around July and August in this year. So it's here what happened in 1973, explaining the attempts to open diplomatic relationship between Mongolia and the US through private memoirs. Okay, so this is about, I will talk about my interview with Ambassador William Andreas Brown. So very first time when I saw him, it was in 2005, October 31st, 2005. So Asia Society, which is in Washington, D.C., and also Mongolian Embassy together organized very interesting roundtable in that date. So this is called this US-Mongolia Relations, the Past and the Future. And there were 9 ambassadors participated in this roundtable. So 9 ambassadors, 2 current ambassadors. At this time, Ambassador Ravton Bolt was the ambassador from Mongolia to US, and Ambassador Pamela Slutz was ambassador from US to Mongolia. All other 7 ambassadors were previous ambassadors. So they all talked about their time, their stories. So it's very nice, open roundtable and the question and answers. For me, privately, 2 ambassadors' speeches was very interesting. Ambassador Kamen, and this photo that I would put is a very unfortunate photo because Ambassador Brown was just out for a few minutes, and then so Ambassador Brown was sitting here, so Ambassador Kamen is here. So for me, speech of those 2 ambassadors very interesting because I'm a Mongolist, and those 2 ambassadors were learning Mongolian language before Foreign Service Institute has Mongolian language courses. That means the Ambassador Kamen learned Mongolian from famous Nicholas Poppe. And Mr. Brown, who was sitting here, he learned Mongolian in Leeds University, not even in America, US, in London, from Onung Urgungonung, very famous Mongolian Mongolist, one of the very first Mongolians who lived in the United States. So the other ambassadors were like from Donald Johnson, Ambassador Donald Johnson, who's the very first ambassador from US, and Ambassador Joe Lake, John Dinger. So all theirs shared their very interesting experiences. So that's one very first time I saw Mr. Ambassador Brown here. So of course, Ambassador Kamen and Ambassador Brown both were not ambassadors in Mongolia from the United States, because he learned Mongolian in 1955, I think. And then Ambassador Brown learned Mongolian language in 1973. And then Mongolia, US established diplomatic relations in 1987. But both are career diplomats, both were ambassadors. Ambassador Brown was the ambassador in Thailand, and then in Israel. So that's the very first time I saw him. And then next, so it's 2010, after 5 years. At that time I was a teacher at the Foreign Service Institute, instructor of the Foreign Service Institute. So one day, the supervisor, Mongolian supervisor, had a new job in, I think it's in Taiwan. There is a FSI section, FSI school in Taiwan. So he was appointed as the head of the Taiwan school of the FSI. So then a new supervisor called us and asked, so he left so many things, and we don't have any space. We are going to throw it away, all old dictionaries, because most of the Chinese dictionaries are very old, so they don't, they're all out of time, so they're going to throw it away. So anyway, just look at there, and then if you need, just pick something up. And then I saw very interesting things. Wow, it's not trash, it's a jewel. To be from Francis, with best wishes from Francis. That's Francis Woodman Cleaves. That's the signature of Francis Woodman Cleaves. 3 Cleaves, just the Cleaves. Francis Woodman Cleaves is an establisher of one of the best Mongolists the whole time, not only in US, America, the whole history, whole in Mongolian studies history, Francis Cleaves. And then that bill is William Andres Brown. Then I remembered, oh, okay, that should be him. So he was not only learned Mongolian from Unen Uchryg Oguulbees, he was the good friend of Francis Woodman Cleaves. Okay, so those 2 things in my mind. So of course I got these books, and kept it myself here. It's not useful for the teaching the Mongolian language, but it's because it's research works. And then this year, in July, my friend Kambat, who works in Trader Joe in Clarendon area. Clarendon is very close from Washington, D.C. So Clarendon Trader Joe, he works in, and then he said to me, hey, I have a very interesting customer. Every time this old man comes and he says, Sambeno, Sambeno. And then he says he studied Mongolian language around 70s. And then like, oh, might be the Mr. Brown. So I took this photo of this book. Okay, next time show this book to him and then ask if he is that man. And then like three days later, the Kambat is calling me. Hey, that's the guy, that's the guy. And then he is very excited to see his book from Francis Cleaves, and he wants to see you. I want to see him. And then it was just before Mongolian Natam. And then Washington, D.C. Mongols have big Natam, and then we together with my friend Kambat, we invited him to the Natam. And this is the during Natam. And then we met briefly during Natam, and then I invited him to the tent of Mongolian embassy, introduced him to the Mongolian embassy staff, and etc. And then we agreed I would like to interview him, and then he agreed very politely. And then I went later in August, I went to see him. Okay, so now I will introduce some stories about what he talked to me, and also he kindly suggested me that in 1989, I think, he had interview with another person, and then he had this. So because he says at that time, 20 years ago, I haven't forgot everything, so you can use that one. Also, I will tell you some more things. So those are some of them is from my interview, and some of them from that interview. So because with his permission, I joined those 2 interviews. So very first fielder from Mongolia, what happened here? So what he says, told to me, like, in Moscow I received a real fielder from Mongolia. So okay, little background from Mr. Andres, Ambassador William Brown. He studied in Harvard, graduated in Harvard University. So when he studied in Harvard University, he was the disciple of this famous Francis Woodman Cleaves. So Cleaves was sinologist, also Mongolist, both. So, and when he studied he was from Boston, and then when he studied Harvard, he studied through the scholarship from American Navy. So only 2 students graduated as a Marine when graduate Harvard. So he directly went after in 1953. That is the Korean War time. So he went directly to the Korean War, but he didn't participate in the war because when he was there, the war was already done, finished. So then he came back to the Harvard because when he was the student, an undergraduate student, he was a very great student, and most of his professors asked him to go back and to do some research works. So he worked with Francis Woodman Cleaves and did his thesis both in PhD and in a master's in Harvard University. Okay, so, and then in 1955, I think 55, he got this State Department test, and then he went to State Department officer. So then he worked in Hong Kong, then in Taiwan, and then in Moscow. In Moscow, he worked, his main job was to observe Chinese and Russian, Soviet Union at this time, Soviet Union relations. Okay, then in Moscow, at that time, I received a real feeler from a Mongolian. He was from Montsame, which was the equivalent of Tas, right? So basically, he's saying it's a very good, friendly relationship. He went to his home, and then the Mongolian guy went to his home, and their kids were friends, and very good. And then that was very important. He said to me quietly, you know, don't you think that's the time to open up diplomatic relations between US and Mongolia? After all, look at the crazy things that are happening in China. You know how we feel. So he directly reported this to the main State Department. Main State already received it. This is something. And so what I did in this lecture is I'm kind of doing jigsaw. So Mr. Brown is telling me his private stories, right? And then I'm kind of what is happening from Mongolian side. So here, Ambassador Bolt Rampton's book. And then he says here, American diplomats went to Tashtsirng, who's from Montsame. So that's exactly the same story. So Tashtsirng, in 1967, he worked in the Moscow in the States. So, and then they met and they talked about this diplomatic relations. Tashtsirng also said he wanted to meet them and also invited each other to their homes. So that's the exactly same story. So that's the person who contacted with Mr. Brown was Tashtsirng. So next encounter in India. After Moscow, Mr. Brown was appointed in India. So in India, the current US ambassador was the Dean of Diplomatic Corps, and because he was Dean of Diplomatic Corps, Mongolian ambassador wanted to visit him. So Mr. Brown said that he already contacted with some Mongolians in Moscow. Then that dean, ambassador said, okay, then you go to escort, you bring him to me and then escort him and you can talk with him too. So, and William Brown, that was his second contact with Mongolian diplomats. And again, here, the Rampton Bolt's book is explaining what happened because he's worked in the archive here and both in State Department archive. So that person was Sandaksuram, American diplomat Brown. So he's mentioning his name, Brown. In New Delhi, he talked with Sandaksuram. And then they were talking about each other, and still they're talking about diplomatic relations. And then here one important thing is Sandaksuram at this time said, okay, we ourselves can decide this kind of things. We can, without Soviet Union, we can decide these kind of things. We can do diplomatic relations establish. But unfortunately, we will see what happened next. Okay, and now this is all the answers of these questions. What happened is Ambassador Yondon's memoir will give those answers. So Ambassador Yondon's memoir also saying in New Delhi, what happened in New Delhi. So it's here he's explaining very nicely what happened. So before that, 70s, around 60s, and even in the 50s, because the Mongolia and the US haven't established any diplomatic relations, the relations, private relations was also very cold. For example, most of these international agreements were signed in Washington, D.C. the Mongolia has representative in New York, right? But still, for Americans, Mongolia is not an independent country. So Mongolian diplomats were not invited to Washington, D.C. to signing it for us. Those kind of things happened. And also, during this, in other countries, diplomatic missions, there were some events. The American and Mongolian diplomats the relations were very cold. They can't even greet each other. This kind of. So now, what Mr. Yondon is saying. Now the Americans and both Mongolians have kind of started to invite each other. It's alternate нүрэ бурууш нүд үзүүрд явсан хүн гинт толгойд охин мэдлэг ивийг ирэх дүрийг санагдуулсан. Энэхүү найрсаг тохион хоёр улсын харилцаанд бэлэг дэмжлэлтэй бас шинэ үзэгдлээ. Yondon is comparing it's very similar that for friends who hated each other many years and then now already just starting to greet each other. It's kind of okay. Let's be close friends again. Okay, so that's all the and then Mr. Brown appointed as a deputy director from during these years he was the deputy director of the Office of Asian Communist Affairs. So it's a very strange name for now. Why it's Asian Communist Affairs. It's because it's the China affairs means Taiwan. For many years, China is Taiwan, but the mainland China is not China, so it's Asian Communist Affairs. So the Bureau of East Asian Affairs. So China desk handles Taiwan affairs. So this Asian Communist Affairs desk handles People's Republic of China, Hong Kong, Macau, and Mongolia. And Mr. Brown said, because there were no relationships, practically nothing with Mongolia. So it's just name. Initiation. So he's saying, now it's not from my interview. It's the interview with Charles Stuart Kennedy, initiated in that date. So now a strange thing happened. Roger Sullivan had succeeded me as a deputy director of the Office of Asian Communist Affairs. So he's giving his job to Roger Sullivan. I had been arguing for some time within the bureaucracy, within house, as it were, that we ought to open up a relationship with Mongolia. My argument was that when we were making this move to broaden contact with China, why not make a similar effort with Mongolia? So that was his initiation. So decision is made, as he remembers, as Mr. Brown remembers, from American side. Decision was made in November 1972. So basically, as he remembers that this Roger Sullivan said, okay, you initiated it, so then you go to the Mongolian language and you will open the embassy. Okay. So he agreed. Okay, I will learn some Mongolian. So he has already Russian and he already speaks Russian and Chinese very well. His PhD, master's all in Chinese. So at this time, only one Mongolian teacher was in the whole United States, John Hangyong Gomjo. He was teaching Mongolian in Indiana University. Unfortunately, exact that year, he didn't work. So for 1 year, he prepared his thesis for his own PhD thesis. So closest Mongolian language teacher was Unen Uchryg Oguulbees, who was teaching in Leeds University. Unen Uchryg and Owen Latimer, they established Mongolian studies and both Chinese studies and Mongolian studies in Leeds University. Owen Latimer is American, and because of the McCarthyism, he gave up his Mongolian studies project in Johns Hopkins and left to. That was very good. It's very bad for Mongolian studies in US, but it was very good, fortunate thing for British Mongolians. So they invited him there, and then he established the Mongolian. So in January 1973, Mr. Brown went to Leeds University. The plan was 3 months study Mongolian language, and then Ulaanbaatar he will establish in Ulaanbaatar embassy. And then he went there. Decision is made. Okay. Yondon's book, Unen Uchryg Oguulbees. So meanwhile in Mongolia, what was happening in Mongolia? So all this is now talking us about what happened from Mongolian side. So the Mongolian side was also very happy. Tugursurung, who was the representative kind of ambassador from Mongolia in the United Nations, he met with Kaman. That Kaman is the same Kaman that in the very first in the photo. He met him. At that time, Kaman was in the State Department specialist for Soviet affairs and also medicine. And they agreed, okay, let's do it. So Kaman explained very openly. That was a very good thing from Kaman. Before, I told you before this, from Poppe, Kaman and Staple Roy, those two learned Mongolian language from Poppe, and they tried to establish relationship. At that time, not from the Mongolian side, the American side, they had the decision that not to establish any relations. That's because of Taiwan from Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek and Taiwan was influenced much so. So Kaman explained, it's because of Taiwan, all these things. Now we are good, we can establish. So everything looked good. So March 29th, that was the very significant date, 73. William Shoufley met in Pontsuknorov. Pontsuknorov was the ambassador from Mongolia to the United Nations. And they met, and then in that date, they practically agreed to establish diplomatic relations. Next important date was here. So, Utrutul, to show the day. So in traditional way, traditionally, to show the date means as picking up the best date. Maybe you already heard this. For example, for Mongolians, some days are very bad for your haircut. Some day is very good to move, to go away, something exactly. Similar thing happens in Mongolian modern diplomacy, but that's not about superstition. That's they have to choose the date that not happening with not the date that big events like, right? Because it's some years later, if there's Mongolian and United States diplomatic relations anniversary, and then if it's happens together with some like New Year Eve or it's some very important Natam day, that will not work. So it's this modern day diplomacy, Uturuzulh is in the meaning of like this, as kind of trying to set up the date that not important date, and then it will make it important date. So they agreed that date, April 18th, 1973, and they agreed we will make, before they will not announce anything, so same day we will sign up diplomatic relations, and then we will announce the whole world exactly same date. Here in America, you're in Mongolia. Okay, good. So everything is done. It's very good. So it's everything is going according to plan, right? See, because January, Mr. Brown studying Mongolian language, 3 months. Here the date, and then he will come here and establish Mongolian embassy here, American embassy here. Okay, meanwhile in London, we were talking, I interviewed him about Unen Uchryg Oguulbees. He was I was interested in him very much, so Mr. Brown says he didn't know he was American citizen. And Owen Latimore brought 3 Mongolians to the United States. Unen Uchryg Oguulbees, John Hangin-Gomju, and Dilowa Khutugtu. Those 3 Mongolians are very first Mongolians who went to United States, who lived in the United States. The only outer Mongolian was Dilowa Khutugtu from here. Hangin-Gomju was Tsahar Mongol, Tsahar. Urgungo was from Manchurian area, but his great ancestors lived in Hure, which means Ulaanbaatar, for a long time, but at that time he was around the Manchuria area. So all are Mongolians, but Dilowa Khutugtu was only from Halkha Mongolia. So those three, Ounda Timur brought them, and those three Mongolians played huge role in Mongolian studies, establishing Mongolian studies, and also diplomatic relations, so all about the Mongolian here. And Unen Uchryg was teaching in Johns Hopkins and then in Leeds. John Hangil was a professor at the Indiana University. Dilowa Khutugtu established very first Mongolian Buddhist temple in New Jersey area, etc. So many stories on that reason. So okay, let's skip that one. So, and also Mr. Brown talked about Alan Nathanson. He was not only student, so two of them. Alan Nathanson, she also studied Mongolian. Those two students together learned some Mongolian. And 3 months of study. Remember, April 18th was the day. Everything was very good and all were happy. And then, very suddenly, Mongolian side disappeared. So, what happened? That's the question that 50 years. It was 1973. So, Ambassador Brown, 50 years didn't get any answer for that question. What happened? I'm ready to go now. From Yondon's book, Mr. Yondon, Ambassador Yondon, he was ambassador in Japan, and then many years he was the deputy minister of the Mongolian foreign ministry. So deputy minister is the one who really works on all this stuff events by his own hands. So he remembers everything with the dates all. Okay, now here the explanation what happened. So second time I went to Mr. Brown's home, and then I explained to him what happened. Okay, so, okay, let me briefly translate some of those. So, okay, that's the date. And then Pontsuknoro was in the United Nations in New York. So, Mongolian People's Party, Revolutionary Party, they also met, and then they decided to establish. And they sent telegram, official secret telegram to New York. So this official telegram, secret telegram, coded telegram goes to Prague and then go to New York. And they were waiting. They sent all this telegram and then they're waiting. No answer. Nothing came back. They were still waiting. Finally, it was 17th of April 17th. So next day, tomorrow, they will establish diplomatic relations. What happened? Somehow they contacted with Pontsuknoro with phone or something. And then Pontsuknoro said, I received nothing. No telegram. So that was very strange. So they checked the Prague. And then they checked everything. So telegram reached Prague. That was the first thing they established. And there is our Mongolian official contact person in Prague. And then he also received it. But somehow from Prague, and on the way from Prague to New York, that telegram was destroyed. No one knows who did what. But Mr. Yondon explains, those were the two countries' relations, those are the time that Cold War, so all the Mongolian foreign telegrams were coded. That was the very difficult job for Mongolians, so these secret codes Mongolians with lots of prize, lots of money. They ordered to do these codes in KGB in Moscow. So KGB knows all these codes, what they wrote, and then also they can get these telegrams from this. So it's of course cool. So Mongolian side knew who got that telegram. Okay, still they're continuing talking, still continuing, and then says it's strange things still going to happen. After it was already 20th of April, so let's postpone it for 2 weeks, and let's establish our diplomatic relations. And then from their states, those telegrams started to strangely slow. For example, from Mongolian side, the telegram is just in 1 hour, right? It should be still very close, very fast. 4 days from Mongolia to New York, 4 days. The answer, the reply from New York to Ulaanbaatar, 1 week. Somehow it's very strange. Someone stopped there, read it, everything, and send it. That was clear. So, and it's going as close, slow, and what's going on? Everything is not now. Okay. Meanwhile, in Washington D.C., even until in July 7th, the American side was very optimistic. It's the Washington Post. This is the Washington Post. This is a Washington Post article. See? Sometime in the next few months, William Brown, a relaxed and well-spoken Foreign Service officer, is expected to open the first United States mission to Mongolian Republic. The 43-year-old Brown has been studying the difficult Mongol language here since January in a tailor-made course at Leeds University. He has now reached the point, he says, where I can fight my way through the ponderous editorials in Unen or Truth. So it's at this time exactly the same kind of course that we have done, right? Now he can have those those things with Artinger called Unutur and Utrinsen and so same thing. The same issue, same article. Urgungo is a wonderful teacher, says Brown, and we can handle the reading of official type Mongol now. We can get by well enough to ask directions, order a meal, and carry on a basic conversation. If no unexpected hitch occurs, at the United Nations, Brown and Miss Nathanson will probably take up their new posts in the fall. They will go to a country of 1.3 million that sits on China's northern border and is firmly in the Soviet camp. Unexpected hitch occurs then. April 29th. Then Mongolian Foreign Minister Rinching, he went to the Prague, and then when he was go back to the Prague, he decided to meet Soviet Foreign Minister, just directly to ask what's going on. The Mongolian side know that the Soviet is playing some games, right? So he met the Vice Minister of Russia, Soviet Union, Vice Foreign Minister Kuznetsov, and then he talked with him directly. We are going to establish diplomatic relations. What you think? And then Kuznetsov didn't say many things, and then he says there is something to talk between two number one guys. Those Namin to Horoni Nigdur Nerimchkin officially it's translated as like first secretary of the Politburo of the Mongolian People's Republic Revolutionary Party. That means almost like president of Mongolia. So one is Brezhnev, other one is Titumbal. So Kuznetsov said no more, no long speech. He just said there's something, some talks have to be between Brezhnev and Titumbal. That's it. So Rinching is now like hand is cut, so he can't do anything. Okay, now everybody is waiting Tsitimbal to meet Brezhnev. What Brezhnev to tell to Tsitimbal? Tsitimbal went in August 1973. Tsitimbal went to have a vacation in Russia. I think usually he goes to Crimea. Yeah, Sochi. Yes, exactly. So Tsitimbal couldn't meet when he was vacation in the Soviet Union. He couldn't meet Brezhnev. But right before he went back from Moscow to Mongolia, he had phone conversation with Katushev, who is the secretary of the Soviet Union, the Communist Party. So and then he again asking what Brezhnev thinks about it. And then in the morning of the exact date that Tsitimbal was flying to Ulaanbaatar from Moscow, Alexandrov, who is the assistant of Brezhnev's private assistant, Alexandrov, came to him in Sheremetyevo. And he says only that thing. He says, the Brezhnev says, wait a little bit. That's it. Wait a little bit. Wait a little. So Tsitimbal came back to Ulaanbaatar and explained this. Okay, no hurry. Yarad Yahovde. Okay, wait a little bit. Yarad Yahovde. So, meanwhile in London, what happened? One whole academic year of Mongolian language training. So he planned 3 months, sir. So starting January, and now it's August, right? August. It's as an academic year, it's a full academic year starting. So William Brown learned Mongolian language very well. And he's asked, let's do something useful. I don't want to just hold my study here. It's just nothing. That would be very unfortunate. So let's do something useful. So Owen Latimer suggested that maybe you should translate the official communist history of NPR. So бүгд найрамдах монголоор тусах history of NPR. He translated. That's the communist version of Mongolian history. So even it's the communist version, of course, this is heavily annotated. Every page has tens of the footnotes that he translated it. So he started on work on this. He worked for 9 months, 12 to 14 hours a daily. He worked on this work, and then he finished it. So that's all this Mongolian language study. It was good. So Brezhnev said, wait a little bit, right? So that wait a little bit is from August 1973 until January 1987. So 14 years, that a little bit. So finally, we established. So now it's in another interesting story about Ambassador Kompsrung, Minister Kompsrung in Washington, D.C. He told me that to me myself. Very interesting anecdotes. Kapitsa, before that, Kapitsa, who was Mr. Brown, Ambassador Brown, says very interesting story with him. The Kapitsa was the one who says no, he was the foreign minister in a Soviet Union. Says all these 14 years here, Gromyko, first Gromyko, second Kapitsa, they were very strongly ignored as a Mongolian side request for established diplomatic relations. So the Mongolian side is kind of tired at this time. So maybe there is no relations with the US. And then in 1986, after Perestroika, right? Time is very different. Still, Mongolian side was very cautious. So Tugursurung, who was the foreign minister at this time, Edward Shevardnadze, who was the then foreign minister, Georgian guy who was Edward Shevardnadze, visited Mongolia. So he asked it quietly, cautious enough, do we need to establish diplomatic relations with US? And then Edward Shevardnadze's answer is, not just need, you must. This time is changing. So that was like, now that was the green light. Oh, okay. So everything starts out January 8th, says. That was the. Okay, at the very end of the, as I promised, so I will show you one very interesting document from Dilowa Khutugtu. I will talk about this later tomorrow in the Mongolian State University of Education, so I can't talk, it's very long and explained it. This is a letter from Dilowa to Luzebu. What is Luzebu? Luzebu. Luzebu. Ich olsing Jontang Luzebu. Who's Luzebu? This is the, Jontang is the Chinese word for president. Equals is the great countries. Your great country's president Luzebu. This is the 1942. Roosevelt, yes, Roosevelt. Roosevelt, that's Roosevelt. Roosevelt. He was in China at this time, and Dilowa Khutugtu was in China. There is no R in Chinese language. So Luzebu. So basically it's saying, it's there are three letters, one in 1932, one in 1942, one in 1944. 3 letters from Dilowa Khutugtu to US. All are similar, basically saying we are in between the Russia and China, very difficult. Please help us. You shouldn't ignore us, Mongolia as a country. America should help Mongolia. That's exactly what is now the official policy of the third neighbor. So Dilowa Khutugtu, Khutugtu means the living Buddha. So that living Buddha went out from Mongolia in 1931. So now it's officially it's Mongolian secret archive. They all says that he went through the intelligence goal as a spy. But until today, they said Dilowa's intelligence this function goal was to be with Banchim Bogda and to talk to him and also to influence Chiang Kai-shek. But from out of those 3 letters, we can say the things real secret mission of Dilowa Khutugtu was to establish connection with the Americans. All 3 letters asked to contact Americans. So I will talk about that tomorrow in the National University of Mongolian State University of Education.